Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope that everyone is staying dry with this weather we're having today.
Good evening.
We're going to wait just 1 or 2 minutes, well, 2 minutes to allow everyone to log on, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. If you want to go get snacks, pen and pencil. So good evening, everyone. I would like to thank you all for joining us tonight for NPU University. And this is our housing security series. This is actually one of the cores of our classes that we teach that I absolutely love because I am a native of Atlanta, and a lot of times I have those legacy residents that, they don't know what to do when it comes to their homes. They don't know what their options are. And of course, I'm the granddaughter of a legacy resident, and I just want to push forward to make sure that they all know what's available to them, as well as the people who live here who are, just moving here or my age, anybody ultimately. But this is our Avoiding Housing Scams and Reducing Property Taxes course. And we partner, oh gosh, sorry, because I'm multitasking. We partner with Atlanta Legal Aid to provide this course, and this is our 3rd year, I believe. So my apologies, you all. I am managing letting people in as well. So we have a few classroom rules. We ask that you please keep your microphones muted. Please keep your cameras on in order to receive course credit. And that, of course, is for anyone who is trying to receive the Citizen Planner certificate. Just as you would if you were in person, that way we can acknowledge that and know that you were present for the course. We also ask that you ask questions during the Q&A. So for this particular course, we have 2 components. And at the end of each part, we're going to take questions relative to the course. We ask that you raise your hand in the queue, and I'm going to show you all on the next page how we do that. And all questions must be relevant to course content. And my apologies, because I feel like I'm being really rude. My name is Samantha Terry. I'm the program manager with the City of Atlanta's Department of City Planning, Neighborhood Planning Unit Division, and I manage our education and education and training in the NPU division. And my coworker, Tony McNeil, who is the program manager for public outreach and engagement, he is on assisting and helping right now. So my apologies, I didn't want to be rude and continue talking to you all without introducing myself. Okay. So in order to raise your hand, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions button. If you click on the reactions button, there'll be a pop-up. The pop-up will give you the option to clap, thumbs up, check, square, any of those things. But to raise your hand, click the raise your hand option, and then it will put you all in a queue in order, and then we'll go based on that. So again, we are joined with Atlanta Legal Aid, and our instructors are Jennifer Rentenbach and Stacy Reynolds, who are 2 awesome attorneys that work in that organization, and they're going to provide a lot of resources. So if you all want to take a couple of seconds to grab some pen, paper, notepads, now will be the time. I'm going to actually turn it over to my co-instructors. Guys, are you ready?
I am. I'll start sharing my screen.
Yes.
Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. I'm Stacy Reynolds. I'm an attorney with the Senior Citizens Law Project of Atlanta Legal Aid. And we're going to sort of do the things backwards from what's in the title of this. We're going to start with the property tax stuff. I actually was one of the attorneys who came up with trying to focus on, property tax issues in the Fulton County and city of Atlanta back in 2017, when the Fulton County suddenly raised all of the values, and so people's property taxes suddenly were going to go up. They of course reversed that, and so luckily we were able to try and get things in place ahead of the big increase. And one of our big focuses is, on homestead exemptions and property tax appeals. And so we're going to talk about, how those can help with reducing your property taxes. So let's get started with a scare tactic. Oops. There we go. We're going to start with the scare tactic. The reason that you want to be sure your property taxes are paid is because if you don't pay them, eventually you're going to wind up in this tax foreclosure process. So I just want to kind of run through quickly what that looks like so that you can understand why you don't want to be there. So your taxes come due each year. And if you don't pay them by that due date, then the interest begins to accrue, and also penalties, and it just gets more expensive. At some point, they will actually issue a lien, or it's sometimes called a FIFE. It's for the Latin that basically means that it's a lien against the property. In Fulton County, that lien can be held by the county, or it can be transferred to third parties. The Fulton County Tax Commissioner does transfer these to third parties. But whoever holds the lien, whether it's the county or the third party, their next step is, they can sit back and get the interest, and you can make payment plans or whatever. But if it's not paid, then what they're going to do is they're going to levy on that lien, which is the first step in a tax foreclosure. And all that is a notice that says we're heading to tax foreclosure. And the tax foreclosure is going to be scheduled. And it's going to look very much like a mortgage foreclosure, except that you're going to get notice from the sheriff that says that this is coming up. But it's going to be auctioned off on the courthouse steps on the first Tuesday of a month, along with all the mortgages that are being foreclosed. But the difference between a mortgage foreclosure and a tax foreclosure is that the property owner still has a right to redeem, and you have that right for at least 1 year. But at this point, it becomes a lot more expensive. You're not just paying the taxes and interest and that sort of thing. You actually have to pay whatever was paid for the property on the courthouse steps, plus 20% on top of that. And every anniversary, it goes up another 10%. So it quickly adds up, and just becomes a lot harder to afford. If you're able to pay that redemption amount, then you redeem the property. It's as if the tax foreclosure never happened, and everything goes back and is fine. But if you're not able to pay that, then the next step is foreclosing the right to redeem. And that is basically when the tax deed purchaser just sends you a notice. And you, again, this is going to come from the sheriff's office, but basically it's a notice saying you have 30 days to pay the redemption amount. And if you don't pay that full amount, then you've lost the home. That's it. And that's the point where they can evict you, and you lose the right to stay there. You lose all rights to the property. So we don't want to get there. So the focus of this is trying to figure out how to make it so that you can pay the taxes when they come due. In order to figure that out, you need to understand how your tax bill is calculated. So the tax assessors start with trying to come up with what your total value of the property is. And unless you bought your house last year, they're just guessing at what that is. And they're going to use the sales from the prior year and the condition of your home and some other variables to figure out what they think your house is worth. From that, you get taxed on an assessed value, and it's a percentage of that total value. For the most part, that's going to be 40%. For the state of Atlanta, it's 40%. So, if your home is worth $100,000, then that 40% amount is $40,000, and that's going to be the taxable amount. From that, they will subtract any homestead exemptions that you have. And then whatever is left over gets multiplied times the millage rate, and millage rate is just a fancy word for a tax rate. And that, the resulting amount is what you pay for your taxes. And this happens with each category of your taxes. Each category is going to have a different tax amount, the millage rate, and each category may have different exemptions as well. So there are two places where you have a little bit of control over trying to keep your tax bills low. One is you want to try and keep that value, what the assessors think your value is for the home is, as low as possible. And you want to try and increase the exemptions you're able to get. So you want to be sure that you're getting all the exemptions you're eligible to get. So the key to dealing with those two things is property tax appeals. That's going to try and keep that total value as low as possible. And homestead exemptions, that's going to, again, make sure that you're getting all the exemptions that you're entitled to get. And so I'm actually normally, when I'm talking about this, especially this time of the year, normally I start with the homestead exemptions and then do the property tax appeals. Today, I'm going to talk about the property tax appeals kind of quickly, because I really want to focus a little bit more on the homestead exemptions, because right now is homestead exemption season. The deadline to file for homestead exemptions is going to be April 1st, which, because that falls on a Saturday, you technically have until April 3rd, but I'm going to still tell you it's April 1st, because if you file by April 1st, you file by the deadline either way. So I'm going to, probably dig in a little bit more on that today, but I do want to run through property tax appeals. So basically, a property tax appeal is the chance to argue for a lower total value so that you can then get a lower taxable value, because if you lower the total amount, 40% of that is going to be lower as well. So that'll lower your property taxes. It's also a chance to argue for why you should be getting the homestead exemption you apply for if you get denied. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. You have to appeal your property taxes within 45 days of the notice of assessment. And the notice of assessment is going to come out usually in the May to June timeframe. It changes every year, though. So that that date changes from year to year. But you want to be sure that you pay attention to the news and things like that, because they'll usually talk about that the notices of assessment have come out. Talk to your neighbors, because if you don't receive the notice of assessment, you're still responsible for that 45-day window, because it's not the day you receive it, it's the day that it was issued. So you want to be sure that that you're aware that it's coming, and be aware that it's going to be something that comes in the mail and it says it's not a bill, and so there's a tendency to say, well, I don't have to worry about it. By the time your tax bill comes out, it's too late to appeal your notice of assessment. That's always going to be more than 45 days from the date that notice of assessment is made available. So you want to be sure to pay attention when that notice of assessment comes out. If you appeal the value, if you appeal the notice of assessment and you see it through the whole appeal, you get a 3-year freeze. And what that means is that for the year you're appealing and the next 2 years, they're not going to raise your tax, your value, which is then going to translate into keeping your taxes relatively the same from the year that you appeal to the following years. So that in itself, in a lot of areas, is a win. So even if you lose at the Board of Equalization, that's what you get. So it ends up being a win in the end. And if you're able to reach an agreement with the assessor's office, and in that agreement they agree to the freeze, then you get that without having to go to the hearing. But for the most part, you want to be sure that you're willing to see it through to the Board of Equalization. The Board of Equalization is not scary. We see a lot of people that decide that they're not going to finish out their property tax appeal because they get the hearing that it's going to have get the notice that it's going to have a hearing, and they see the words hearing and they think it's going to be really scary and formal. It's a very informal thing. It's basically you and the appraiser for the county arguing over the value in front of 3 people. And the 3 people are just taxpayers like you. They have the same concerns you do. They're going to be listening to what you're saying. So as long as you can give them some sort of evidence that supports lowering the value, they're going to listen to it. And a lot of times they will lower it. So it's worth, going through it and not being afraid to do that. The types of the evidence you're going to want to look for is correcting the information that they have. Like, let's say that you have, 2 bathrooms and you really only have a 1.5 bathroom. You can show them, okay, I don't have that other half bathroom, or the square footage is wrong, or anything that's going to lower the value, you want to point out that information is wrong. And also, they haven't been in your house. They don't know exactly what the condition of your house is. They're doing this based on computer models and things like that, and maybe a drive-by. They're not actually coming in and seeing the condition of your home. So sometimes you can show the condition of my home would suggest that it should be a lower value. You can also look at other similar homes in your neighborhood to see what they're saying that those values are, or for what they sold for, to use that as evidence for supporting a lower value. You do want to make sure that you're looking at comparable homes. That's going to be kind of similar homes to yours. And there's they sort of divide arguments into uniformity or value appeals. The uniformity is that the assessor is saying that the value of the similar homes needs to be similar. And so if they're not doing that, if there are homes that are similar to yours that are being valued lower, you want to point to those and say, well, that's not fair. It needs to be uniform, and I should be able to get mine as low as this other house is. The value appeal is going to be if you find sales that would support a lower value, then that's going to be considered a value appeal. This graphic, I found this graphic actually on Facebook, and unfortunately, I don't know the correct provenance of it, but I just thought it was a really good sort of visual of what you're trying to do in a property tax appeal. Basically, you're trying to present evidence that your home is the modest home that you live in, as opposed to the grand palace that the tax assessor thinks it is. So, it's not a really hard evidence rule kind of hearing. You just need to be able to provide something to show that the value should be lower. This is what your notice of assessment looks like. And so I want to run through some key things when this comes. Again, this is going to be probably May or June. You're going to get it in the mail, hopefully. If you haven't gotten it in the mail and you hear from someone else that they did, what you want to do is go online. You can actually get it from the Fulton Assessor's website. So when you get this, you want to be sure to look at some key things. The big one is the notice date. It's going to actually tell you the date it was issued, and it's going to tell you that deadline for the appeal. So that's going to be the key thing to knowing when you should be appealing this. And you want to be sure that you get your appeal filed before that deadline. It's going to give you the exemption status. So this is going to be important for what we're going to be talking about in a minute. It'll tell you what they have for whether or not you have a homestead exemption. And it's going to say either yes or no. And it's going to, if it says yes, it's going to give some random code that's almost impossible to decipher. If it says no and you applied for an exemption, then you're going to want to appeal that they haven't given you the exemption. Now, it may just be that they're still processing it. It sometimes takes them a very long time to get through the slew of applications that they get at this time of year. So, the deadline is April 1st. They may still be processing them by May when they start doing these. So, be aware that it may still come through, but I still suggest that you appeal, because you can always withdraw that appeal once the homestead exemption is approved. You can't go back in time and appeal it if they somehow never got it, or something goes wrong and you want to appeal it. So it's better just to go ahead and appeal and then withdraw it later. If it says yes, and it says HF01, that's the basic exemption. And you'll hear more about the differences between basic exemption and other exemptions. But if you should be getting the basic exemption, then that's fine. If you've applied for a higher exemption and it only says HF01, you want to think about appealing it. If it says something other than HF01, it's virtually impossible to figure out which exemption you're getting, because if you go to the Fulton Assessor website, they have a list of all the exemptions, and it's impossible to decipher. I've asked them for a better explanation. They just gave me that same list. It's impossible to decipher. And so basically what they told me is that if you have a question about the what exemption you're getting, you should call the assessor's office. So if you're not sure what the code is that's showing, call the assessor's office, ask them if that's the right one. If it's not the right one, appeal it, assuming that you actually did file an application before the deadline. You also want to look at the value, because again, this is your chance to challenge that value on your home. They're going to give last year's value and this year's value. And so you can see if there's been an increase. If there's been a big increase, then you want to think about appealing it, because a big increase is probably going to result in a big increase in your taxes. And to help you judge that, they also provide an estimate of what your taxes are. And what they do with this is they actually use the new value that they're proposing and last year's millage rates. Because when this comes out, the cities and counties and school board are still working on figuring out what the millage rate is for this year. But this will give a good, estimate of what your taxes are going to look like with the new value. So it's helpful to look at that. And again, if that seems to be a big jump from what you paid last year, then you want to think about appealing. Okay, now we're going to get into homestead exemption. This is the part, again, that I'm going to focus on tonight, mostly because we're in the middle of homestead exemption season, because the deadline is going to be coming up soon, but also because, as Samantha talked about earlier, legacy homeowners can really benefit from homestead exemptions. And I want to get the word out there to legacy homeowners that they should still be able to get the homestead exemptions. And so the great thing about homestead exemptions is that they get subtracted directly from the taxable value of the home. So they're an automatic savings. Charnette Trimble, who runs the grandmama's house, describes them as her big fat discount coupon. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It basically subtracts from the taxable value, so it ends up being a direct savings to you. You have to apply for homestead exemptions. You're not going to automatically get it when you first buy your home. They're not going to automatically say, okay, here's your basic exemption. You actually have to go in and apply. If you become eligible for any additional exemptions, and we'll talk about what those are in a minute, you need to go back and reapply. And this is true, as you age, there'll be different exemptions that come up at 62, 65, 70. They're not going to know if you're getting the 62 or older exemption. They're not going to know 3 years later that you should get the 65. You have to go in and reapply for these things. And you need to notify them that there's a change that would make you not eligible. The deadline is April 1st to get the homestead exemption for this year. You can apply after April 1st, but you're going to be applying for an exemption for the following year if you do that. Now, again, the statute says that the deadline is April 1st, but it does allow for if April 1st falls on a weekend or a holiday, then the deadline gets extended to the following business day. So it's going to be extended to Monday, April 3rd this year. Again, you have until April 3rd. If you need to get it in, if you need to get it postmarked, that's going to be the magic date. But if you can get it filed before April 1st, that really is ideal, I think. If you apply for an exemption and it is denied, or if they are not allowing you to apply for the exemption that you're qualified to get, then you need to appeal that denial, because not being able to file for the exemption is the same as a denial. So you need to appeal that and fight to be able to get the exemption that you're qualified to get. Why is the homestead exemption important now? And really that change goes back to 2018. So again, for those of you who've been in the city for a while, you know that 2017, there was a whole big outright, upraising because they were increasing the values. And so people started worrying about what is this doing to our legacy homeowners? And so they started looking at ways to try and help save homeowners money when it comes to these rising taxes. So this is an example from the 2018 tax bill. This is a senior who was getting the highest exemptions at the time. And without any change in the value or the type of exemptions that she got, because they instituted the floating exemption and improved the exemptions generally starting in 2019, her 2019 tax bill was cut almost in half from what she paid in 2018. Again, no change in the value, no change in the types of exemptions. Just because they changed the way those exemptions worked, it became a really big savings. So the floating exemption is a huge benefit for homeowners to be able to reduce their property taxes. What is the floating exemption? And I get this question a lot because people get very confused. Especially the people who remember the law that they voted on in 2018 was actually described as a value cap rather than a floating exemption. So, well, wait a minute, what happened to our value cap? And then people hear the word freeze. I've told you about the 3-year freeze if you appeal. So how do these different terms work when you're looking at your tax bill? The first thing is the floating exemption and value cap are actually the same thing. So that actually the referendum that they had that instituted the value cap, and then that basically became known as a floating exemption. What it does is it caps how much your value can go up from year to year. It basically says that from one year to the next, you can't, your taxable value can't go up any more than 3% per year. Now, it's actually based on the consumer price index, and the consumer price index actually has been lower than 3% every year for the past several years. But I'm going to, in my example, I'm going to use 3% because it's just easier to say. And this would be the most that you would see, most increase that you would see. So if you took a home that was worth $250,000, they're going to be assessed at 40% of that. So it can be $100,000. Let's say they locked in the value last year at $50,000. That's going to be the assessed value from last year. Well, that can only go up 3% or no more than 3% for this year. So that means that the value cap is going to be $51,500. It's going to be last year's value plus that incremental increase that's allowed. From that, they then subtract any exemptions, any additional exemptions that you're entitled to get. So in this case, it's the basic exemption of $30,000. And that's how they get the net assessment that gets multiplied times the millage rate to figure out what your taxes are. When you see your tax bill, that's not what it looks like, though. And so it gets really confusing. Well, wait a minute, I thought that my value was capped. Why aren't you showing me this? And my understanding is that they're working on trying to figure out a way to show it better. But the way that your tax bill is calculating this is they're taking that difference between what the assessed value is for this year and the cap on it, and they're taking that difference and they're lumping it into the exemptions. So basically there's $48,500 that's above the cap, and you're not going to be taxed on that because they're going to put that into the exemption with $30,000 to come out with the same net assessment as you do when you do it the value cap way. Honestly, for me, the value cap way makes a whole lot more sense. I had to do the math to figure this out, but that's the way it works, basically. There's also a exemption freeze. I'm sorry, there's also the term freeze, and that is a little bit different. That's not the same as the floating exemption and the value cap. It actually does freeze the value so that from one year to the next, it doesn't go up even that incremental amount. Then so, I'll say that you had won your Board of Equalization appeal last year. It capped your taxable value at $50,000. That means this year your taxable value is $50,000. It's just going to stay there. And so it ends up being a little bit of a savings on your property taxes. Another question I get a lot is, well, if I have this great floating exemption that caps how much my value goes up for tax purposes, why do I need to appeal? And the reason is that the floating exemption does not apply to all of the categories of your tax bill. And especially in the city of Atlanta, the big one it does not apply to is your city of Atlanta school tax bill. That one is going to be, totally subject to whatever the value is. So this example that I pulled up, let's say that this person, well, what I've done is I've used the highest senior exemption that you can possibly get. So this is not your basic exemption like I used in the other examples. This is the highest exemptions that a senior is going to be able to get in the city of Atlanta. And they're still going to be paying a lot of school taxes. So that even with the highest exemption, it's still not as high as if they were getting the basic exemption with the floating exemption, in my other example. And the millage rate tends to be higher for the school taxes. So this is where I get a lot of calls from seniors saying, wait, I shouldn't have to pay school taxes. But there is no full exemption for City of Atlanta school taxes for seniors. So they do have to pay it. And once the value goes up above that, it's around 190,000 that it goes above what it gets exempted by the senior exemptions. And so at that point on, you're paying school taxes. And as the value goes up, you're paying more and more in the school taxes. There's also the bonds typically don't get covered either, but the school taxes is always what I get called on. Okay. So now we know that the exemptions save you money. Let's talk about who is eligible to get that homestead exemption. I have a tendency, like everyone else, to use the phrase that if you own your home and live in it, then you can get the exemptions. It does require that it's going to be your primary residence, but the idea that you have to own your home is a little bit misleading. You need to have a bona fide claim to ownership that fits within the categories in the law. And the categories in the law are a little bit broader than if you have the title in your name. Now, if you have a deed in your name, then you are going to be eligible for the exemption on your home. There is an exception for spouses, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But for the most part, if your name is on that deed, whether it's your name alone or your name and other people, you're going to be eligible for the homestead exemption for your home. But there's other categories where you don't actually need that deed in your name. You could have a life estate in the home. So even though you don't have full title, just having a life estate is enough to get the homestead exemption. The law also allows for a person who has a contract for the purchase of the home to get the exemption if the end result of that contract is that they own the home. So again, this is the contract for the purchase of the home, so they don't yet have that deed. And again, going back to the legacy homeowners, this is where I really try and emphasize legacy homeowners should be able to get the exemption, some of them anyway, based on the law as it is right now. A person who resides in the home that's owned by a parent who is either deceased or incapacitated should be able to get the homestead exemption in that child's name, regardless of whether the property has been distributed. So the fact that the statute says, regardless of whether the house has been distributed, tells me that it's not asking for a deed in the person's name, because if it hasn't been distributed, there is no deed. And so this should allow people to be able to get the exemption while they're dealing with the probate or whatever is necessary to deal with the title that's in their parent's name. Also, a person who resides in the home that he or she will inherit, but the home is being actively probated, should be able to get the exemption. So when there's actually an administrator or an executor appointed, the heirs or beneficiaries that are living in the home should be able to get the exemption while that administrator or executor is still dealing with the estate. I can't tell you how many times I've been pushing on this, because it's such an important thing, really, for the legacy homeowners who have like tangled title where they're going to have to do multiple estates or deal with, probate can just get really complicated for people who don't have clear title. And so this is a way for them to be able to get it while they're dealing with all of that. The person who resides in a home that's in a trust can also get the exemption as long as they're the beneficiary under that trust. And finally, the spouse of a homeowner who lives in the home is able to get the exemption, even if it's not the spouse's name is on there. Now, the law actually says that if it's in the name of the wife, the husband should get it. But, I can't imagine that that would be read in such a sexist way. I think that it would be that if either spouse owns it, either spouse can get the exemption. And that makes sense because the exception that I was telling about earlier is that if one spouse is getting an exemption, the other one can't get one somewhere else. The spouses are considered kind of one entity for purposes of getting a homestead exemption. So even if the spouses are separated, own their own homes individually, live in their own homes individually, only one of them is really entitled to the homestead exemption. So that's the one exception to someone who owns their home being able to get the homestead exemption. Again, I just really want to emphasize this slide because I hear a lot of lip service being done for legacy homeowners and trying to make sure that people are able to save their homes and the generational wealth that goes with them. And this is a way that they could. That I hear so many people that run into problems with losing their homes to property taxes while they're trying to go through to fix whatever the title issues are to get the title straightened out. And at least some of those people should have been able to get the exemptions to lower those property taxes while they're going through that. Now, when you apply for the homestead exemption, you are going to have to provide some pieces of evidence to show you're eligible. You're going to have to show your ID. You're going to have to provide the vehicle registrations. If you're applying for some higher exemptions, you're going to also have to apply for, you're going to have to provide income information. If you're applying for one of these categories where you don't actually have a deed in your name, I think that you also need to provide the documents to show that. You need to show the proof that you qualify under these categories. And so, if you have a deed in your name, it's easy. That shows you have the ownership. If you don't have a deed in your name, then I think what you need to do is get the recorded deed, and then show how you link to that recorded deed to show that you're eligible. So for example, if you're the child living in the home of a deceased parent, then you're going to want to have the birth certificate to show that you're the child of that deceased parent. You're going to want to have the death certificate to show that that they passed away. If the probate's going on, you want to have the probate records, a copy of the will, whatever documents you need to show that you qualify under one of these categories that links you to what that last recorded deed was. That's what you're going to need. So that can get a little complicated, but basically it's just, use some common sense to think about, well, this is how I'm eligible. This is what I need to show. You do have to live in the home. It has to be your primary residence. You can't get a homestead exemption on a vacation home or anything like that. It really needs to be where you live, where you vote, where your car is registered, all of that. There are some exceptions to you having to live in the home. So like if you have to be out of the house due to health reasons, you're still able to get the homestead exemption, even though you're not actually in the house during that time. Or if you're serving in the armed services, even if you have to be out of the home while you're repairing it due to some sort of fire, flood, or something like that. But with that, you need to be back in the home within a year. There's also a thing where the homeowner's spouse or children could live in the home without the spouse that owns the home being present. But again, only one spouse is going to be able to get the homestead exemption. There are also 2 deferral options for people who are 62 or older, but they're very limited. So I'm not going to go into this into any detail. I just want to mention it, that if you can't afford to pay your taxes, then you can talk with the tax office about whether or not you can qualify for the tax deferral options. basically what it does is it allows the taxes to just remain a lien on the property without you paying on them. But it's very limited because it has income requirements that are very, very narrow. And it's limited to how much they can, it's limited by the value of the property and how much has been encumbered already. So it's narrow, but I just want to throw it out there. Okay, actually, I don't have, sorry, I think I'm missing a slide, but I want to mention to you that the types of exemptions there are. What's that? Well, the types of exemptions that we have, there's a basic exemption that anybody can get, as long as they fall into one of the categories who is eligible for an exemption. Anybody can get the basic exemption regardless of your age or your income. They also have additional exemptions that are available as you age or when other life events happen. So at 62, at 65, and at 70, there are additional exemptions you can get. If you're disabled, you can get the exemptions at a younger age. So, even though you're not yet 65, you can still get those 65 exemptions at a younger age if you're disabled. There are also some exemptions for people like disabled veterans, the surviving spouse or minor children of disabled veterans, the surviving spouse of a firefighter, police officer, or military who have lost their life in the line of duty can get some additional exemption. Now, most of those additional exemptions do have income limits. Those income limits are going to be a lot, they're going to seem a lot lower than they are because they don't actually count your full income. They don't count most Social Security. They really are only looking at sort of the taxable income that you have. And so a lot of people will qualify for those, especially if they're retired, that you wouldn't expect to if you just looked at what the value, what the amount of that limit is. For example, one of them, the limit is $10,000. And most people, even someone who's living on a fixed income gets more than $10,000 a year for the most part. So, but because they don't count the Social Security, that brings a lot more people into that category. So it's worth applying for it. There is a 65 or older exemption that is basically a basic exemption enhanced for people who are seniors. It allows you to get the senior exemption without regard to your income. But then there's also the 65 or older exemptions that do take your income into effect. So it gets a little confusing, but it's worth applying to try and see what exemptions you're able to get. Okay. So this is the property tax timeline. So this is sort of your year, but it actually goes a little bit more than a year. So January 1st is going to be the key to when you become eligible for the exemptions and for when they think your value is set for your home. So let's say you turn 65 on December 31st, you're eligible for the 65 or older exemptions starting the following, starting on January 1st. So you need to apply for that before April 1st. If you turn 65 at January 2nd, then technically you're not going to be eligible for the 65 or older exemptions until the following year. So you don't have to apply for it by April 1st. You just need to apply for it by April 1st of the following year. But you can apply for it at any time. It just won't go into effect this year. April 1st is the deadline. Technically you have till April 3rd, but April 1st is the thing you should keep in your mind because that's the statutory deadline for applying for homestead exemptions. After April 1st, they will come out with a notice of assessment. No telling exactly when that'll happen. Usually it's May or June. From the date that it comes out, you have 45 days to appeal. Once that deadline passes, you no longer have the right to appeal. So by the time your tax bill comes out, it is too late to appeal. If you have appealed, the tax bill you get is going to be a temporary tax bill. That means that you're going to be taxed on either 85% of the assessed value or last year's value, whichever is less, and you need to pay that bill. And you also need to start saving some money so that if at the end of your appeal, the value ends up being higher than last year's or higher than what you're being taxed on, that they're going to do a final bill and you'll need to pay that difference. If it turns out that whatever your resulting value is less than what you were taxed on, with the temporary tax bill, then they'll give you a refund for whatever that difference is. From the time that you file your appeal, it takes a while for the county to process all those appeals and get them over to the Board of Equalization. So it is months and months before you actually would have a hearing on the appeal. And in fact, the hearings often go into the following year. They're still doing the appeal from last year. So that's basically the homestead exemption and property tax bill. I do want to mention that, again, we are in the middle of the homestead exemption season, and Atlanta Legal Aid has partnered with the Atlanta Beltline Partnership and Grove Park Foundation to try and do some outreach to help people with filing for their homestead exemptions. So we have 2 actual in-person workshops that are going to be coming up. One is going to be on March 18th at Pittsburgh Yards. The other one is going to be on March 25th at Allen Temple AME in Grove Park. Both of them are going to be in person. Both of them are going to be from noon to 2 p.m. We want you to register for slots if possible, because we're going to try and make sure that we have enough volunteers to deal with the people. And basically that's a great place for you, especially if you fall into one of these categories where you may need the extra home ownership documentation. If you bring it all in, we can help you with sorting through to figure out what you need to upload and helping you with uploading it. When you apply for homestead exemptions, you need to apply. Well, we recommend that you apply online because it actually, it automatically generates a thing confirming that it's been submitted, and then so you have the proof that you submitted it by the deadline. You can apply with a paper copy by mail, or walk into one of the any of the tax offices and apply. So with those, if you do any of those, you want to be sure that you do it in a way that confirms that you actually have applied by the deadline, because it's going to take them a while to process it. So if you come to one of our workshops, we'll actually help you with doing an online application so that we can be sure that it actually did get submitted. So, do you have any questions?
Okay, I am looking at the chat first, and then I will acknowledge hands. So the first question, I believe that we have, I have received my notice for appeal. This is my second time. Actually, April, if you can, because I don't want to ruin anyone's question. So if you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much for having this in service tonight. I am inheritance of my parents' home along with 2 of my siblings. And so I have gone through an appeal just after they passed in reference to the taxes increasing substantially. I think I did get a 3-year moratorium. At that time, I did have the 3 other taxpayers, I guess, who were citizen representatives. But I guess I felt a little bit torn because I lived in Southwest Atlanta. They lived in North Fulton. So I don't know if they had relevance to what I was sharing. So my question is, and I've talked to the assessor, there's been no new changes or upgrades per se to the home. There are no new services in the area. Actually, it's probably more depleted of services. And so I'm just curious whether or not going to the hearing, I did do appeal last year. I got the temporary bill. I paid what was on the temporary bill. I've got the notice that no new taxes are going to come my way. So they closed it based upon the Board of Assessors, I believe. but I'm going to the equalization. I need to make sure that that's going to be worth my time to go back down there again to the hearing, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, so the reason it's worth your while is that even if you lose, you do lock in that value for the following 2 years, so that this year and next year, you'll still get that value from last year's appeal. So that in itself is a win. You're right, the Board of Equalization doesn't always decide the way you want them to. But sometimes they do, and sometimes, they'll surprise you, so it's worth doing. I would suggest focusing on the condition of your individual home as opposed to the services around you, because a lot of what they're going to be looking at is what did homes sell for in your neighborhood, and presumably the homes that are being sold subject to whatever services are in the neighborhood, but they're not going to have the same condition issues as your individual house. So, if you can show that your house has, a foundation problem or leaks or, hasn't been updated in, decades or whatever, those are things that'll resonate a little bit more. You want to think about if someone were going to come in and buy my house, what would they reduce the value for? What would they demand that you reduce for them to fix or whatever? Because that you're wanting to show that your house would not actually sell for what they're saying.
Okay, I can do that. And thank you for sharing that, the homestead, there are some options for us. We had not explored that, so now we know. So thank you.
Yeah, and definitely do that, because the people who are inheriting their homes, if you go into the tax office, a lot of times they're going to tell you, do you have a deed? You say no, they say, okay, sorry. And that, a lot of times they won't even take the application. And I get so frustrated with that. They should take the application. I think they should approve it. But even if they're not going to approve it, they need to take the application and let you appeal it, and then and fight it out in the Board of Equalization. And again, you can call Atlanta Legal Aid to see if you can get some help in doing those sorts of appeals.
Okay, thank you very much.
Our next question, what is considered a senior? It seems to be different for different situations.
That's a really good question, actually. Because you see some things where they actually go as low as 55. For the Senior Citizens Law Project, for my unit of Atlanta Legal Aid, we define it as 60 or older. For the homestead exemptions, they're going to define it as 62, 65, or 70. But yeah, it really depends on what program you're looking at to decide what they define as a senior.
The next question, can you get an exemption on a rental property?
No. Homestead exemptions are just for your homestead, your primary residence.
When applying for the homestead exemption online, do you need to submit your license and vehicle registration for your spouse's vehicle as well?
I don't know if they always require it, but it's a good idea to submit it if you can. Because they may come back and ask for it. They're definitely going to want to know if you're applying for one of the ones that require income, they're going to want to know the spouse's income, definitely.
Mrs. Ficklin, you can go ahead.
Yes, I have this letter that says from the Board of Equalization. We, the members of the Board of Equalization, knowing no reason to disqualify ourselves from making this decision, having heard all evidence in which I haven't presented any evidence, and having reviewed the information submitted in which I have not submitted information, do hereby find the 100% appraisal to be at $306,000. So just a year ago, my house valued at just $30,000.
Wow.
Yes.
So was that value that they found, was that the one that the notice of assessment said?
Yes, the board is from the Board of Equalization. And
right.
also,
So basically, so what it sounds like happened is that they had the hearing without you. What you
Right.
need to do is you need to call the Board of Equalization and tell them that you didn't get notice, assuming you didn't get notice that they were
I
having a
didn't get
hearing.
notice.
So you need to contact them, tell them that's what happened and
Okay.
see about getting it rescheduled.
Okay,
And if they won't, then you can appeal that decision to Superior Court, but your best bet is to get that hearing rescheduled where you can actually attend and provide your evidence.
okay. And so what evidence should I take with me? Should I take previous taxes where it was only $30,000 and now for some reason, because people are moving in, upgrading their homes?
Mrs. Fickling, because we don't want to focus on like specific things, if you want to direct message her, and email her afterwards so you can find out exactly
Yes,
what
I
you.
was just asking, is that the reason why my taxes had gone up because of all the renovations in the area? That's all.
Yeah, again, the way they determine your total value is they're looking at sales in your neighborhood from the prior year. And they're supposed to take into account condition and all that stuff, but you know, it's flawed. So that's why it's important to appeal and try and make the argument that
Okay,
they're focusing on the wrong sales.
okay. That's all I
Another-
wanted to know. All right, okay.
Another question we have, our property is only in my wife's name. She is 62 and disabled. I am 72. Can we apply for exemption based on my age?
You can, but if she is actually disabled, she can probably get the same exemptions at her age. If she's 100% disabled, there is a physician's form that will have to be filled out where the physician has to sign that she is disabled, but she can probably get the exemptions just based on her, you know, being fully disabled, even though she's at a younger age.
Carla
But
Phillips?
if
Oh,
she
I'm
was just, you know, just to take that a step further, if she was not eligible on her own, you should be able to get the exemption at, for the 70 or older, even though you're not the one that's on title.
Carla Phillips?
I have a question. I live in a neighborhood that is has been gentrified. And so I always have a hard time finding homes comparable to mine that are not, I mean, all the homes are so much bigger and have all these bells and whistles. And I just have a little house that I've been in for 13
Yeah.
years. And so what can I do? Because all of the houses that are like mine have the same number of bedrooms and everything are super fancy.
Yeah, and I think,
fancy.
and that's sort of your argument. Well, you can compare your home to bigger homes by using a price per square foot, where you take the total value that they have for the home and divide it by the living area that they have down. And that'll bring it a little bit more apples to apples when you're dealing with a smaller home versus some bigger ones. But I think also you can just say, you know, listen, here are these homes that are valued near the same amount as what you say mine is worth. And they're so much nicer. You know, my home is not in this kind of condition. It hasn't been upgraded. It doesn't have all these bells and whistles. And so you can argue that it should be lower than that just based on that.
So do I need to take photographs to show, or will they just take my word for it?
Your word is testimony, but I would definitely bring photographs because they love seeing the truth of what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
Are you required to apply each year for the homestead exemption to receive it?
Ooh, that's a very good question. That's something that I forgot to mention. For almost all exemptions, once you apply for them once, you will get them for as long as you stay eligible for them. You don't have to reapply for them. Fulton County does have a single exemption that is for 65 or older low income. That is only a 2-year exemption. That actually will expire. You have to renew it every 2 years. Once you turn 70, you can bump up to the 70 low income one and no longer have to renew it. But for that period, from when you're 65 until you can get to 71, you do have to be sure to go in and renew it every 2 years. And one of the problems with the way Fulton County handles those, unless they've changed something in the past year, what they do is if it expires, even though this is an exemption that only applies to Fulton operating costs, it doesn't apply to city taxes. It doesn't apply to even all of the Fulton County taxes. They actually remove all of the exemptions if you don't reapply for that one. So you want to be sure that, particularly if you're in that 65 to 70 category, you want to, contact the tax office and make sure that you're not getting one that you have to renew. I will say on that one that I believe there is legislation pending to try and change that. It'll still be a couple of years before that can happen, but that may be changing. But for now, be sure to call the assessor's office to make sure you don't have that one exemption.
And this will be the last question, and then we're going to go into our next section. Do they take age of home into account if everything else is equal? For example, if you have an 85-year-old house that's 2,500 square feet and there's a 15-year-old house that's the same size, do they generally use the size of the home to determine assessed value, or do they consider age of the home also?
They do. So what they're trying to do is looking at similar homes. And so age of the home is one of the things that gets factored into whether or not it's similar. And so the, age of the home, size, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, style of the home, all of those things sort of get calculated in there. You can still use, newer homes or older homes or whatever as comparables, but you're going to need to kind of show why they're somehow similar, why they speak to a lower value for your home. And I can stick around to the end of Jennifer's part so that if people have questions and if there's time, we can do any other questions there are at the end.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to show us how to not get scammed. Jennifer.
All right. Well, thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay. Okay. Let me start, and you can hear me all right, Samantha? Okay, so I'm Jennifer Rettenbach. I'm also an attorney at Atlanta Legal Aid. I work in a unit at Atlanta Legal Aid that we call the Home Defense Program. And in case you're not familiar with Atlanta Legal Aid, we are a nonprofit organization. We're a nonprofit law firm, and we provide free civil legal services to lower income individuals in the 5 metro counties of the Atlanta area. So if you or someone is having a legal problem that's civil, not criminal, I'd encourage you to call Legal Aid. There are only certain types of problems we help people with, but I encourage you to call Legal Aid and see if you could qualify for our services. We do have income and asset limitations, but encourage you to call or go online and see if you can qualify. Even if it's a problem not of a type we handle, we may be able to give you some advice and potentially referral. Within my unit, the Home Defense Program, we focus on issues and problems that that homeowners have, and I'm going to talk to you, which largely falls into 2 different buckets. We deal with mortgage servicing issues, including foreclosure issues, wrongful foreclosure cases, giving people advice when they're facing foreclosure. And later this year, another one of my colleagues is going to be doing a presentation with the MPU program on foreclosure prevention. The other kind of big bucket of work we do is handling all types of legal issues related to different types of homeownership scams. And unfortunately, there are all kinds of scams that we see. Unfortunately, there are all kinds of people out there ready to prey on homeowners, particularly if people are facing some financial difficulties. There are people ready and just willing to pounce to take advantage of them. So I'm going to talk about some different types of see, there we go, of scams we see and try to give you some tips to hopefully avoid these scams. So different buckets of scams we're going to talk about tonight. We'll talk about home theft scams, mortgage assistance scams, foreclosure surplus scams, and some general advice about avoiding scams. Okay, common features of scams that we see. One is charging money for help in situations where you shouldn't have to be paying for the kind of help offered. And we'll talk about some examples of that. Very aggressive tactics. Scammers often try to create this sense of urgency that you've got to act fast. Maybe they're making an offer to you for something that, you know, it's only going to be there for a limited time. They don't want to give you time to think about it, or they're trying to scare you that something really bad is about to happen and you better act really quickly to avoid it. So again, it's often this rush because they don't want you to take time to think about things. They don't want you to read documents. They don't want you to talk to, you know, trusted advisors or friends to see if what's being pushed at you really is a benefit or not. Scammers often guarantee results, right? They're often targeting people who, again, who are at risk of some event, of a tax foreclosure, a mortgage foreclosure, or otherwise a financial issue. And scammers will often guarantee that they can fix the problem. Again, they often discourage you, try to isolate the person they're trying to scam from talking to anyone else who might potentially tell them, hey, that sounds like, I see some red flags. That sounds like somebody might be trying to take advantage of you. A lot of scammers will often pretend to be affiliated with either your mortgage company, with the government, or a nonprofit. So really encourage you to do some research, and if somebody is saying, or you see something on their website or on their documents, on flyers that says they're affiliated with a mortgage company, the government, or nonprofit, try to independently do some research, you know, online or otherwise, to try to verify if that's really true. Other hallmarks of, particularly of home fraud and home equity theft, is scammers often target vulnerable communities and claim they are just there to help save you from whatever horrible thing they're telling you might be about to befall you. So they target often our senior citizens, veterans, other people who may be particularly vulnerable. They will attempt to gain your trust. Scammers, you know, are con artists, so they can often be very persuasive in convincing people that you know, they are your friend and they are just here to help you. Beware of spam calls that you aren't expecting. Of text messages, spam text messages from you don't know who they're coming from, and from emails. Those are all different ways that scammers try to solicit the people to find the people that they want to take advantage of. We often see scammers advertising outright on utility poles, going door to door, knocking on people's door, doing in-person solicitation. Before I came to work at Legal Aid, I had a whole legal career in the private sector, and it really has been eye-opening to me at Legal Aid to realize that I just was unaware that, particularly when people are at risk of foreclosure, so the foreclosure process may be underway, either mortgage foreclosure or tax foreclosure, there is public information that a home is being listed for foreclosure, and scammers find that information and they go and target those people. So people who are already struggling and in a tough position, there's a whole dark underbelly world of people waiting in the wings, ready to prey on those people. Again, beware of this rushed process of somebody saying they're trying to help you, but you've got to hurry. They don't have much time. You know, you just got to sign these documents. They don't want you to have time to read them. Be wary too of electronic signature of documents. We often see people here at Atlanta Legal Aid who have signed documents electronically and really don't realize that electronic signature on your computer, on your phone, is generally just as legally binding as if you signed a document with a pen. And oftentimes people will have signed something electronically because they've been told, right? It says something on their phone, but they couldn't even see the entire document. But that document can still be legally binding if you electronically put your signature on it. So really caution you, do not sign anything with a pen or electronically on your phone or your computer unless you have seen the entire document, you've had a chance to read it. Ideally, you would have a chance to also show it to whether it's a lawyer or another type of trusted advisor, somebody else, if you're being asked to sign a document, that you really have time to look over it and get comfortable with what it says. Another hallmark of scammers is that the scammer will tell you what the documents say, and they will lie to you. And the documents will say something very different than what the scammer says the document says. And when you sign that document, even though it's been misrepresented to you, right, that it says something else, legally, once you put your signature on it, it can be very, very hard to get out of that contract. Georgia law generally imposes this duty to read. If a person can read, there's this legal concept that says you have an obligation to read and not to just rely on what somebody else tells you the document says. All right, specifically types of common home theft scams that we see. We'll talk about each one of these a little bit. The deed hidden in loan documents, a sale of a home with a buyback option, a fast sale for way below fair market value, predatory loans. And we'll talk about a couple of different types of home purchase scams, rent to own, lease purchase, and seller financing, and then home repair and improvement scams. So the deed hidden in loan documents. This scam, the way it can take some different, it can present itself in some different ways, but what the different ways we have seen is, again, this is usually when someone is in financial distress and they need money because they have a specific problem, right? And this false savior type, some kind of scammer gets connected with this person and offers to help. I'm just here to help you. I'm going to make you a loan to help you out to deal with this problem you're facing. Documents are presented. Again, it's usually this fast process because they don't want you to have time to read it. You think you're signing loan documents, but in fact, a deed that transfers title is hidden in those documents. You sign, again, they're rushing you. They don't want you to have time to read it. And you don't find out till later that you actually signed over ownership to your home. Again, we see these, I'm not making these situations up. We really see these situations here at Legal Aid, and they are difficult to deal with. We've taken some of these cases, but I will tell you they are all challenging cases. So the better thing to do on the front end is you're going to sign documents, take your time. Don't be rushed. Make sure you understand every single document you are being asked to sign, that you have time to read it, or that you have time to sit with someone else who's not this person making this quote loan, someone else you trust who can read it with you and make sure you understand it. Another common feature of scammers that we see is they have people sign documents and they don't give them copies of the documents. They tell them, oh, I'll get back to you with the copies, and they never get them. So that is something too, to just be aware that's a red flag if you're not being given a copy of the documents that you are signing when you sign them. All right, the home sale with buyback option scam. The way we have seen this scam presented is, again, as a scammer approaching the homeowner who's in some kind of financial hardship and needs money in a quick way. And the scammer offers, again, to make a loan, right? It's going to be a loan, but for whatever reason, the scammer will tell you, they'll make up a story about, yes, this is a loan, you pay it back, you're still going to own your home. I just need, for whatever false reason the scammer makes up, I need it to be structured as a sale, that you sign a deed to me, but you're going to have this option agreement that you buy it back. So I give you money to solve your problem. You sign over a deed to me, you get to stay in your home like a renter, but we all know this is really meant to be a loan, and you'll have this option within a certain time period to pay me back my money and, some extra for making the loan to buy your home back. Where we see this happen, be really, really cautious if somebody offers you or someone a deal like this, because where we see this happen, the contracts are designed to fail. Sometimes that option contract in the fine print turns out to be a lot more expensive than the homeowner thought it was going to be. Sometimes, the scammer just outright lies about what the document says. Again, there's this rush process. The homeowner didn't have time to read it. One way or another, we see these deals set up to fail so that the homeowner will not be able to exercise that option. And again, the documents weren't actually structured as a loan. So the scammer now says, I own your home and I got to buy it really at a bargain, right? Because they didn't pay a fair market value sales price. They gave you some loan that was a lot less than the value. Again, this type of scam, we really see this happen. And when those documents are signed, it can be very, very hard to undo this kind of deal. I say deal, quote, undo this kind of scam. Okay, the next kind of scam that we see, and we're seeing this one, unfortunately, more and more often as home prices have risen over the past number of years. This is the fast sale for far below fair market value. So scammers who are targeting often the elderly or unsophisticated homeowners, people who may not have owned real estate before and may not really have an idea of what their home is really worth, particularly in gentrifying areas. So the homeowner may want to sell their property, or they may just be convinced to sell by these scammers. We see these scammers come in and again, very persuasive con artist types come in and tell the homeowner, oh, you've got all these problems with your home. It's going to cost so much money to fix it up. And really convince the homeowner that their home is worth a whole lot less than it might really be if that homeowner really wants to sell. Our advice, if you want to sell your home, our advice is always, we think you should talk to a licensed real estate agent, and if you're going to sell your home, list it to the public for sale so that it is out there on the multiple listing service to the entire public. That hopefully will generate the highest possible sale price. A real estate agent, yes, there's a percentage fee. But again, because a real estate agent, a licensed real estate agent gets paid based off a percentage of what you sell the house for, they do have an incentive built in to try to help you get the best price possible. Again, this scam, this fast sale for below fair market value, typically, again, it's this fast process. They don't want the homeowner to talk to anyone else. They don't want them to talk to their family or friends. So there's a rush. This is this great deal, but you got to do it now or it's going to go away. We often also see this scam with someone being tricked into signing a sales contract. So I've seen this scam present itself again with that electronic signing, that somebody doesn't realize that what they're signing is actually a contract to sell their home, because the scammer tells them it's not a contract. So it could be a paper contract, it could be on a phone or a computer, but the scammer may say, don't worry, this doesn't lock you in. I just need to sign some documents to start this process, right? So I can get my contractors in here and figure out what we could really offer you for, but I need you to sign this to be able to start this process. And the homeowner doesn't know that what they're signing actually is a legally binding document to sell their house for a lot less than it's worth. Again, once you sign electronically or with the pen, it can be very difficult and sometimes not possible to unwind. So my biggest advice here today is do not sign anything that you have not had time to read yourself or with someone else you trust to confirm what that document really says. Do not rely on that person who's trying to get you to sign the document Don't rely on what they tell you the document says. Okay. Now we will talk about a couple of different types of home purchase scams when you're in the market to buy a home. So there are two different types of rent to own transactions that we call scams because we see these transactions structured in a way almost always that they are designed to fail. So two different types of rent to own, the contract for deed or the lease with an option to buy. What a contract for deed is it's a way to buy a home where you enter into a contract, and instead of getting title, of getting that deed to the property on day one when you're going to move into the house, don't get title, you don't get real ownership. You sign a contract that says when you make every single payment on what is functionally a mortgage, every single payment. So if it's 30 years like a typical bank mortgage, you make every single payment, and then at the end of that very last payment, that's when you get the deed. One of the really big problems with the contract for deed is the way those transactions are structured is that contract will say that if you are late one payment during that term, that your right to buy that property is terminated and you can be evicted like a tenant. Now, there are legal issues with that contract, but what gets really hard is that people will try to enforce that contract by its terms. You miss one payment. Now, you've thought you're the homeowner, you've been putting money into improving the property, to fixing it up, but something happens in your life and you're 1 month late on one payment. That contract for deed seller sends you notice terminating the contract and tries to evict you like a tenant, and you could potentially lose everything you've invested in that property. So these transactions are really, really risky, and we tell people to avoid them at all costs. They are marketed and sold to people as to people who maybe don't have the best credit. They're marketed as this is a less expensive way for you to become a homeowner. That bank won't give you a loan because your credit's not good. But they are so risky, and frankly, again, we believe they're almost always set up to fail. That we would caution you and tell anyone do not do this deal. You have so much to lose. It is much, much safer to just continue renting until you can work on your credit, work on your income, work on your savings, and get to a point where you're in a position to buy a home with a conventional mortgage from a bank or a credit union or another reputable lender. The other type of rent to own scam that we see, again, I'm calling it a scam because we believe these transactions are typically set up to fail, is the lease with an option to buy. And I mean, I will say, right, sometimes they work. So, they're not all scams, but there's so many of them out there in the market that are scams and they're just so risky that we would caution you really ought to avoid them. There's so much to lose. The lease with the option to buy, what that looks like is you have a lease like a regular tenant, but you also have this option to buy the property. So they're typically structured with, within a certain time period, whether it's 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, you have this option or right to purchase the property for a certain price. Some of the issues with the way these transactions are structured is you pay a lot of money, typically, sometimes thousands of dollars for that option, that right to buy, that you might never be able to exercise that option. So if you aren't able to, by the end of the option period, to come up with the money to get a bank loan, a credit union loan to buy the property, you lose the option. A lot of times the monthly lease payments you're paying are higher than a typical rent payment in the market, because they'll provide that there's some extra that will go towards your option price. But typically these contracts are structured that if you don't exercise that option, you lose that extra money that you've been paying. So these contracts tend to be very expensive. And there's just a high risk for people that they aren't able to exercise that option and they lose that right to buy, and they've now spent a whole lot more money than they would have on just a typical lease, and they're saving separately on their own for when they're ready to buy. Seller financing. So the reason we talk about seller financing as a scam, and what I'll pause and say first, what seller financing is you buy a home and the seller makes you a loan to buy the home instead of getting that loan from a bank or a credit union or another reputable lender, mortgage lender. The issues with seller financing, generally, seller financing is being offered again to someone who isn't in a position to, because of their credit or other income situation, they aren't in a position right now to be able to qualify for a typical bank or credit union loan. So seller financing tends to be much more expensive for that reason. Higher interest rate, higher fees. The other big risk with seller financing is what's called a wraparound mortgage. And we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what that is. So going back to the rent to own for a minute, problems with that contract for deed and that lease purchase option, right? You're entering into a contract, you're not legally the owner until with that contract for deed, you make every single payment. The lease purchase option, you actually exercise the option. So in that contract for deed, right, you sign a contract and you're going to make payments for 30 years and then get the deed. You're not legally the owner, so you can't sell the house. Maybe it goes way up in value. You don't have the right to, unless that seller decides to be cooperative, you don't have the right to just sell the house and realize that value. But these contracts are typically structured, particularly the contract for deed, that you're getting all the burdens of home ownership, even though you're not legally the owner, all the burdens of home ownership from day one. You're paying the property taxes, you're paying the homeowner's insurance. Typically, you're making all the repairs, and often we see these transactions done where the home is really not in good shape, and that can really be a problem for people that they don't realize when they get into these contracts what it's going to take to bring the house up to, a habitable condition, what the cost of repairs are going to be to make it. And again, you miss one payment, you get evicted, and you lose everything you put into the property. So seller financing and that wraparound mortgage. What is that wraparound mortgage? Here the concept is seller financing, right? You're buying the home from your seller, and the seller makes you a mortgage loan, not a bank or credit union. Again, it may be a very predatory, expensive loan with high interest rate and fees. Where we see these, they're often, it's often just an individual. So they may be poorly managed. It's not being, you have a mortgage loan from the seller. You don't have a mortgage servicer that's in the business of handling mortgage loans, sending monthly mortgage statements, keeping track of the payments. So there may be math errors and poor record keeping, which can lead to disputes about what's really owed on the mortgage loan. And that wraparound concept, what that means is when you buy a home from a seller and do seller financing, the seller may still have their own mortgage in place on the property. That's why it's called a wraparound. So your mortgage wraps around their mortgage, because the idea is you as the buyer make your mortgage payments to the seller, and the seller is then supposed to take part of those payments and pay their underlying mortgage that still exists on the property. Because remember, you didn't get a loan in the scenario from a bank or credit union who gave a big lump sum to pay off the seller. So the seller may still have their own mortgage on the property. So here is the risk. You, Jane buyer, make your monthly mortgage payment to Mr. Seller. Mr. Seller is supposed to turn around and pay Mr. Seller's underlying mortgage to Main Street Bank. But if Mr. Seller doesn't pay Main Street Bank, then Main Street Bank can foreclose, and you, Jane buyer, even though you did everything right, you made all your payments, you still lose that house. And you may have a right to, and you would have a right to sue your seller in that scenario, but the house is gone. Main Street Bank, their mortgage was there before you came along. they foreclose and the house is lost. The safest way to buy a home is, and sometimes it means waiting, and that can be hard, but these arrangements we're talking about are so risky. We really encourage you and everyone wait until you are in a position, you've working on your income and your credit, you're in a position to get approved for a mortgage loan from a bank or a credit union where the closing is handled by a real closing attorney who will do a title examination, and you get title insurance that makes sure that that seller who sells it to you, they actually own the property, they have good title, and that there's no other mortgage on the property that's not being paid off at the time of your closing when you buy the house. Okay, moving on to mortgage assistance scams. So, when people suffer financial hardship and get behind on their mortgage, there unfortunately is this whole body of scammers out there offering to help people deal with their mortgage companies, get a deal to get caught up, to get mortgage payment assistance, to get a loan modification to get caught up. But there are a bunch of people out there who are offering that service and are actually just scamming people. So these mortgage assistance scams, where we see them, they are charging money to help, quote, help stop a foreclosure. Now, I do want to distinguish between, legitimate lawyers, will charge fees to do work to help stop a foreclosure. You want to be careful with any lawyer you talk to too, that you really understand the services being offered and what it's going to cost you. There are lawyers who are scammers too, but if you hire a lawyer to potentially help you stop a foreclosure, there will be legal fees. But there's this whole world of people who are not lawyers out there saying that they can help people stop a foreclosure, and they charge money up front, which is actually, if they are, in most cases, if those people are not lawyers, it's actually illegal under something called the MARS rule, Mortgage Assistance Relief Services. It's actually illegal for them to charge money up front to help stop a foreclosure. These scams often collect sensitive data from you in the process, your bank account information, your social security number. Sometimes that's just a separate scam to steal your identity. Some of these scammers may request payment from non-traditional means, so beware of requests for someone who says they're going to help you and you need to pay them by buying a gift card. That is a red flag. These scammers often take people's money and do nothing to help them. So be aware that if you or someone has suffered a financial hardship and you may be behind on your mortgage, that help may be available for free. So I encourage you or anyone to call Atlanta Legal Aid Society and see if you may qualify for free legal help in this area. And then regardless of what your income or asset level is, you can contact a HUD certified housing counselor. So that HUD, the Department of Housing at U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, has a program when they certify housing counselors to help people who are experiencing financial distress. There on the screen, you have the Find a Counselor link. A HUD certified housing counselor offers free services to help people look at their situation and evaluate what options might be available to them. You should never be paying a HUD certified housing counselor for help. If you or someone has been targeted for this kind of scam, I encourage you to report that to the Federal Trade Commission, and we have the link there. The FTC is pretty aggressive in going after mortgage assistance scammers. Okay. And I think this is our last type of scam we'll talk about tonight, the foreclosure surplus scam. So if you or someone has suffered financial hardship and you have lost your home to a mortgage foreclosure, you should know that if there is a surplus, and what that means is if the if the price paid for your home by the person or entity who buys the home at foreclosure, if that foreclosure sales price is more than the debt owned on your property, so that mortgage that was foreclosed, if there's a second mortgage, if there are other liens on the property, any debt on the property, if the price paid is more than all that debt, which sometimes it is, and sometimes it's a lot more in the market we've seen in the last few years. Any surplus belongs to the homeowner, and the homeowner is entitled to that money and should not pay anyone to get that money for them. The homeowner is entitled to the surplus, and again, should not be paying anyone to get it. There are scammers out there who are actively marketing to people. They target people the day after or the day a foreclosure sale happens, because it's public information that the sale happened, telling the homeowner that there's a surplus and that the homeowner will never be able to recover that money without their help, and charging them, in some cases, really obscene amounts of money, like a percentage, 30%, 40% of what's recovered to go get that money, when the homeowner is absolutely entitled to that money without paying anyone to get it. The process, if this ever happens to you or someone you know, is you contact that foreclosure law firm that handled the foreclosure, request an accounting, and it'll take a little bit of time, but contact that foreclosure law firm, request an accounting of how the funds, how the money was applied after foreclosure. The foreclosure law firm may ask that party to sign a release to get the money, and that is typical, but then you get the money. Again, that scammer instead is going to offer to help get the funds for a fee, which may again be an enormous fee. The scammer does almost no work. They just make that call themselves to the foreclosure law firm. They have you sign this complicated contract or an assignment of the surplus funds. Call the law firm, get the money, and give you a small fraction of what you were entitled to. Again, it's a nasty, nasty world of people out there ready to prey on people who are already in a financially difficult place and need every dollar they're entitled to start fresh. Okay. We're near the end. Protect yourself from scams. Most of this I've already said, but I'm going to say it again because it's all worth repeating. Do not sign any papers with your pen or electronically that you yourself have not had the chance to read or that you don't understand. Do not rely on what that person who's trying to get you to sign says the documents say, because they very well may be lying. If at all possible, have someone you trust review those documents with you before you sign. And don't pay for help if you don't have to. Before you pay anybody for assistance with your mortgage, foreclosure surplus, investigate and see if you can get free help from a HUD certified housing counselor agency, or call Atlanta Legal Aid and see if you can qualify for legal assistance. Don't answer those robocalls or open spam texts or emails you get, or click on email links. Those are all ways that scammers target people. And don't give anyone you don't know and trust your social security number or your bank account information. So here at the end, here is contact information for Atlanta Legal Aid. This is specifically my unit, the Home Defense Program. I mentioned at the beginning that we serve the 5 metro counties. One important expansion of that is for seniors. We do provide assistance to Georgia seniors all across the state, and seniors for that, as Stacy mentioned, is defined as someone 60 or over. There's a separate number to call. So even for people outside of the metro area in Georgia, if you're a senior, you may qualify for help from Atlanta Legal Aid. And that is it. So I'll be happy to take any questions.
So I'm going to go through the chat and see. I believe Stacy was actually answering some questions figure out. Do we have any hands? But that means, Jennifer, that you explained everything. Well,
I do
April
see,
Bankston.
I think I do see one here. Let's see. I might be jumping in the middle, but I see,
No, April Bankston, go
Okay.
ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all of the great information. I may have missed this answer, but if you own your home outright and you want to make sure that there is nothing fraudulently, I've seen commercials or something about getting another like title. I don't know if it's title insurance or something so that you know that your title is still with you and not someone coming behind.
yeah. So I think you're talking about commercials there's some services out there that tell you that you can pay for a service that says it will give you, notice if somebody goes and records something in the deed records. What I would say is I have not, I don't have enough information about those services of whether you're really getting good value for your money. What I think they're doing is just giving you notice. I will say, and I can follow up after this. I think, and Stacy, if you're on, may know.
Yeah, I'll chime in on this.
Yeah.
There actually are free services. I know Fulton and DeKalb both have them. And then there's also a statewide one where you can actually sign up, and it's supposed to give you notice whenever there's anything filed in the deed records about your home or about whatever property you've registered with them. It's free. Don't pay somebody to do that. I will say that they're preying on the fear that someone has taken your title. Because they see periodically there's stories about this where someone fraudulently claims to own the property and then sells it to somebody. Or there was a case where they sold it and the home was being demolished before the homeowner realized what was going on because it wasn't a home they were living in. So there's a lot of fear out there, but for the most part, this doesn't happen. And to the extent it does happen, a fraudulent deed does not pass title. And so, once you discover it, it takes some doing to unwind, but it can be unwound. And undemolishing a home is a lot harder. But again, I think it's these companies that may be providing a service, but they're preying on that fear. And so I think it's better to go with the free services that are out there. That's just my personal opinion, though.
Yeah, and we can follow up and give to Samantha. I don't have it here at my fingertips, the information for where you can find those free services.
Mrs. Gilliam?
How you doing? I just have a question about the property taxes. It's the property taxes, the value of the property taxes, do they change yearly because the value of the property? Does it also include the value of the properties that's surrounding your home? Like if my home is at $250,000, does my property taxes go up because of the property taxes or the renovations that's going in the neighborhood around my property?
The answer is sort of. So as the values go up around you, probably the value that the assessor says your home is worth is going to go up as well. And the assessor is supposed to do a reevaluation basically every year to try and keep the values at what they think are fair market value. And so as those values go up, then the percentage that you get taxed on goes up. And then so the end result is usually that your taxes will go up, but also sometimes the millage rate goes up. And so that will also cause your taxes to go up. You kind of have to worry about all of these things. And the homestead exemption is one way to try and cut that by having you get the exemptions deducted from that taxable amount, whatever it is. So it can help. that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Melody Ford?
Hi, I had a question that was missed in the chat. For property tax, the home next to me is boarded up. Does that affect the value of my home?
Sort of. Again, I hate to be vague, but in theory, so what the tax assessor is doing with their computer system is it's probably not going to take into account that house next to you. But if someone were to try and buy your house, then they would probably look at the neighborhood and things like that, and it would affect what they'd be willing to pay. So if you're appealing your taxes, you can use that as an explanation for why it should be lower, because that would affect your value.
Yeah, that's what I want to try to do. Even though the area is going through gentrification and their houses going for $350, $550, I feel like it's not fair to me. Thank you.
Sure. And I will say on the property taxes, Atlanta Legal Aid, Atlanta Beltline Partnership, and Grove Park Foundation also have sort of a long-term partnership where we actually do workshops around the time of the notices of assessment to help with filing for tax appeals as well. So you may want to keep an eye out for those.
Do we have any other hands? I think there was a question in the chat. In regards to the statewide service information, do you have, what is statewide service information? I think, Jennifer, you might have mentioned something.
Yeah, I think that question is asking for the information about where you can sign up to get notified if something is recorded in the deed records against your property. Statewide services for free. So we will need to follow up with that. I don't think Stacy or I have it at our fingertips, but we can follow up with that information.
Okay, awesome. All right. If we don't.
I know the statewide one is through the Georgia Superior Court Clerks Cooperative Authority, but I'm not sure if there's a specific website, and we can definitely get you the link for that and for the Fulton and DeKalb ones.
Okay, thank you. So I will actually include those in our evaluation email, which you all will be receiving shortly after we conclude our course tonight. I want to thank Stacy and Jennifer so much for doing this again with us. I feel like this is actually one of our more popular courses because a lot of times people just don't know what they don't know. And I appreciate the services that you all provide for the residents of Atlanta. And based off the chat, I think they appreciate it as well. So thank you all again. Everyone following this course, you will receive an email that will have the evaluation link for our survey. Please just take the 2 minutes to complete that survey for me. Also, I will have a couple of links of a couple of things that we actually talked about in the presentation today, as well as a copy of the presentations as well. So you will have those at your fingertips. If there's some things that you might have missed, you want to go back and look at. And also this video will be available on our webpage tomorrow, as well as on our YouTube page. So if you just want to go back and watch it, or you want to share it with a friend, we definitely ask that you do that. Our upcoming NPU University courses include Building Permits for Beginners. This is our first year doing this course, so I definitely ask that you all participate. It's March 30th at 6 p.m. on Zoom. And following that course, we're gonna circle back around to our partners with Invest Atlanta. And we're going to talk about understanding public housing. That is on April 13th at 6 p.m. and that is also on Zoom. If you have any questions in reference to anything related to neighborhood planning units or about NPU University, please follow us on Facebook at NPU Atlanta. That's also Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then we are also very present on Nextdoor under the surname City of Atlanta Neighborhood Planning Units. So if we don't have any more questions, concerns, I think the chat might have been going live while I was talking. I want to thank you all for participating tonight. stay safe out here. It's a little wet outside, so just, if you don't have to go out, don't. But thank you all again and have a good night.